one world currency.
The New World Order.
Those are the roots of trouble.
I imagine that right now you're feeling a bit like Alice, tumbling down the rabbit hole. Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life. That there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. All I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. But I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people.
And now, welcome to another episode of Down the Rabbit Hole. Here's your host from federaljack.com. It's Popeye.
Tonight is special JFK night, as I've been doing once a month since last year, I've done other episodes, but since last February, I've been focusing at least one show per month on the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. So tonight, the past couple months, I've had Judith Baker, I've had Vince Palomera on. Well, tonight, I wanted to change it up a little bit. I want to get into the forensic side of things because, as has been told to us so many times on so many different occasions, that by different researchers over the years, if we only had enough forensic evidence to back up what we were talking about and what we were, the conspiratorial angle of it, if you will, we'd be able to bring this to a court of law and find justice finally. But no one's ever really tackled it in the forensic field. Well, tonight, my guest has. Now, I want to read you a little bit of a bio about her really quick so you can get a chance to know who she is and understand why it's important to take what she has to say seriously. It's extremely important, okay, to research the JFK assassination. I've talked about this time and time again. But in this case, you have a forensic specialist, somebody who testifies in court. And this isn't like a radio show host. This isn't just an author and researcher. This is someone who literally, her work has either freed people or put people in jail. And it's never been able to be refuted. It's that spot on. So who is this mystery super person I talk about? Her name is Sherry Fiester. She's a retired certified senior crime scene investigator and law enforcement instructor. She's got over 25 years of experience. She's testified as a court-certified expert in crime scene, she has testified as a court-certified expert in crime scene investigation. That was a mouthful, couldn't get that one out. Crime scene reconstruction in bloodstain pattern analysis in Louisiana federal court and over 30 other judicial districts, including Louisiana, Mississippi, and Florida. She's author of numerous different articles in professional publications, and she's recently completed a second book. And it's everything, her work is done from a forensic standpoint, a scientific standpoint, the standpoint of getting into it, doing the research hardcore, okay? That's the standpoint. This isn't someone in their basement. This isn't a conspiracy theorist or a radio show host or an author that you can just sit and throw labels at, throw attacks at, pejorative comments, whatever. You can't just attack her work. It's not that simple, okay? Her past work in her professional life as a crime scene investigator stands above all of that. She's like a ship plowing through the sea, ladies and gentlemen. She knows her stuff. Now, I had the pleasure of talking to her for a few hours before we came live tonight on air, and she's just an amazing lady, and I want to get right to it because you need to hear what she has to say, and you need to check her book out. And by the way, her book, the title of it is Enemy of the Truth, Myths, Forensics, and the Kennedy Assassination. I just amazing. Ladies and gentlemen, you need to purchase the book. So without further ado, I want to bring to the airwaves Sherry Fiester. Sherry, welcome to the broadcast tonight.
Popeye, thank you so much for having me.
Your book, I got to say, I've read a lot of stuff on the JFK assassination. I've done a lot of research over the course of years. As I said to you earlier, I've been researching this since I was about 14, 15 years old. And I've never seen a work of, a completed, compiled work of evidence put together in a forensic fashion. I've seen people talk about crime scene, use reference work to maybe a forensic manual here or there, but I've never seen, other than perhaps Cyril Wecht, I've never seen anybody else go into it, at least as in-depth from your point of view, from your standpoint as a crime scene investigator. And I read your book, and, I admittedly, I haven't read it cover to cover yet. I've read through some of the chapters, and I've had the chance to talk to you, and the evidence in there, I have to say, it hands down, it's a slam dunk. You cut through the garbage. As you put it, myths have no place in historical references. They have no place in history, and we need to sort through this garbage, and you did just that. And ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't ever heard of Sherry's work or her book, you need to go out and pick up a copy. Sherry, before we get into any of the technical details with the forensics and everything, which I want to pick your brain about, I want you to plug where they can get the book really quick, because this is one of those books, ladies and gentlemen, that I tell you that you need to get a physical copy of and have. This thing is one of those books. So, Sherry, where can they get a copy of it?
You can purchase Enemy of the Truth at jfklancer.com, or you can purchase it through my webpage at sherryfiester.com. Of course, it's also available other places online and through bookstores and that type of thing.
All right, cool. And again,
if you want an autographed copy, then you need to order it either through my webpage or through jfklancer.com.
Okay, so the best place, I would just say go to your webpage or go to jfklancer.com and order it that way. But you can, I have seen it on Amazon. In fact, I was telling Sherry this earlier today. I was on Amazon the other day picking up some books for reference material, and while I was going through, I happened to see her book as a suggestion on there. So that's pretty cool. And ladies and gentlemen, I tell you what, if you don't think that conspiracies are real, you've heard me talk about the evidence before. You've heard me talk about all the Jack Ruby and Oswald, and you've heard me talk about their connections. You've heard me talk about the connections to weaponized cancer. You've heard me talk about all these behind-the-scenes shady stuff that was going on behind the scenes. But we never really got into the crime scene. Now, I've talked with Vince numerous times about the Secret Service stand down and the Dealey Plaza where the shooting took place. But again, I have not gotten a chance to sit down with a forensic expert and do so. So, Sherry, I want to do just that. I want to start to pick your brain about the crime scene. As a crime scene investigator, someone who does this and has testified in court numerous times, where would you say would be, like, as an experienced investigator, what would you say would be the first thing you want to tackle in the crime scene that is Dealey Plaza and the assassination of John F. Kennedy?
Well, absolutely. The first thing that you would want to do is to make sure that the scene is protected, that it's not going to become contaminated, and you want to document the scene, because once you leave, then you no longer have access to that information in a pristine state. It's going to be altered in some way. It's altered just simply because people are going to be there. And of course, we think about this a lot more today than they did in 1963. But the book starts with what Dallas Police Department did. And I don't look so much to Dealey Plaza as the crime scene because no physical evidence was collected from there. But I do look at the Dallas Police Department and the Texas School Book Depository and determine whether or not they processed that crime scene in a way that would have met the standards in 1963. Because it isn't fair for us to compare what we do now with what they did then. So that's, the first thing that I would have done if I would be working a crime scene today. And it is the first thing that should have been done if you were working a crime scene in 1963. So the first myth that I address speaks to Dallas Police Department and whether or not they followed protocol.
Yeah, and in the book, again, she destroys anybody's opinion that the Dallas police did a hell of a job, because that's what that is. That's an opinion. It's not a fact. Like,
Right.
An opinion that's been turned into, again, what you said, Sherry, a myth. That's what a lot of this stuff is. A lot of it is myths. And some of this stuff, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, myths on the other side, too, on the conspiratorial angle. There are people that swear to God, the shot came from the grassy knoll. And I'm not saying that there wasn't a shooter there or anything like that. I'm using this as an example, and we're going to get into this. But there are people that'll get attached emotionally to an idea. So we'll use the grassy knoll as an example. And then if evidence comes out showing that maybe it wasn't the grassy knoll, but someplace else close to the grassy knoll, but maybe, the ballistics and everything and just the forensics don't show that. They show it was here. Somebody might get emotionally attached to that, just like somebody would get emotionally attached to, no, it was only Oswald and no conspiracy. It's the same thing. And what I like about your book, Sherry, is you cut right through the crap. There's no emotional attachment to either side. You strictly deal with the forensics of the whole situation. And what amazes me is when you stick to the forensics, you still come out with the fact that it was a conspiracy and that the evidence shows that there definitely was not a single shooter. And you don't even have to get into whether it was Oswald or this person or that person. You destroy the whole official story, and you give facts for conspiracy by just taking a look at the crime scene itself as a crime scene in a forensic way. And the Dallas police did a horrible job. A horrible job. What would you say, out of everything that they did, if you could pick one thing, one red flag that the Dallas police, that it exposes their behavior for what it was, what would you say would be the one major thing? Although I know, and anybody that's researched it knows, there's way more than one thing. But what would you say?
There are several things, but I think the biggest mistake that they made was placing someone that had no training and no experience in the position of making the decisions about what had to be done and protecting the crime scene, which is exactly what happened. Studebaker, who had been with the crime scene section for a very short time, was left there by Lieutenant Day, and he had to decide, what am I going to photograph? What has to go on the sketch? How am I going to process for fingerprints? What needs to be collected? All of those things were left to his devices, and he wasn't in the position to make those types of decisions. He was markedly inexperienced. He didn't have the necessary skills and training, and he was unsupervised. I think that right there created the majority of problems, and the fact that not only did his supervisor, but the supervisor above that, Lieutenant Day's supervisor, they all knew that that's who was left in charge and that's who was processing the crime scene. But they determined, we have our man, so it doesn't really matter what is going on at the crime scene. And I think they gave it a secondary position in their mind. And as a result, the crime scene in the Texas School Book Depository was very poorly handled. And the evidence is skewed, and I think it's terribly unreliable.
And your book, again, ladies and gentlemen, to understand a lot of the stuff that she brings to bear, evidence-wise, as to why this is so, we couldn't get into it in a 2-hour broadcast on that chapter alone. I'm telling you, it's that in-depth. You need to purchase this book. If there's one JFK research book that you need, that you can afford to purchase in the next 3 months, make it Sherry's. I'm not kidding. And you know, I mean, there's a ton of great work out there. There's a ton of great authors out there that have published stuff. But if there's one work, if you want to convince somebody with, you know, that say, you know, someone that loves CSI or whatever city episode show that they like about it, you know, there's 18 different spinoffs. They like CSI, right? Oh, I love that Gil Grissom. He's so smart. Those CSIs, they know everything. Blah 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 blah. Well, okay, here you have Sherry, who is a real-life CSI, okay, telling you that in her book, not only was there a conspiracy, but just pointing out so many different things about a bunch of different, I would say, myths, but one of the biggest myths is the Dallas police and their investigative prowess, which here you have, again, a certified crime scene investigator telling you that the Dallas police and the investigators of the time didn't even follow SOPs from the 60s, stuff that was in place back then. I mean, I know things have changed, Jerry, over the course of time from then till now, but would you say that even according to 1960 standards, they were very lax?
Yes. Absolutely. In fact, it wasn't just the 1960s, but those standards had been in place since the 1950s. So these people came up through their department and entered the detective field knowing what the standards were. And, you know, there's really not much of an excuse. At that time, Dallas was, I think, the 10th largest city in population in the U.S., and they were one of the top 3 for 3 years before this in the number of homicides. So they had the experience. There was no reason for them not to have the experience. And they had the training, because Lieutenant Day testified that he had training. And even Studebaker said, you know, we're supposed to use a certain type of processing for fingerprinting on cardboard boxes, but we have this new type of powder that I'm going to use, a magnetic powder. And so that's what he did, when that is absolutely not the type of thing that you would use. So even when you know something, it doesn't mean that you're going to do the right thing. And I think some of it had to do with the fact that in the 1960s, crimes were not solved with forensics like they are today. Crimes were solved because detectives knew their beats, or the police officers on the street knew their beats, and they developed suspects, they brought them in, and they were absolutely fabulous at getting confessions and information out of people. Their skills, the skill of questioning people, were the skills that were looked for in detectives. Because just take the single thing of fingerprinting. If you have a fingerprint in 1963, and in fact, even in the 1970s and the early 1980s, if you didn't have a suspect, there was no one to compare it to, and there was no way to compare it. So why, if you had no suspects, would you take a fingerprint and just do what? Stick it in a drawer? Because there was no way to make a comparison. Then AFIS came along, and AFIS automatically identifies fingerprints. So you can put all of this into a database, and then you put that one print that is questionable, and it spits out a number of people that it could possibly be matched to. But if you didn't have that, then it makes it unimportant. And that's the way that they looked at physical evidence to a great degree there. Even though we were on the cusp of forensics becoming important, some of them still had that mindset that we have the confession. Look, we have Oswald in our police department. We've got our best guys trying to get the information out of him. So we don't have to put our best guys over there at the Texas Blue Book Depository. Yeah,
they figured they already had their man, so...
That's right.
There you go, ladies and gentlemen. Scientific proof. I don't know what you need more. It's just right in your face. All right, we're going to break. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back in a few minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. Enemy of the Truth. Myths, Forensics, and the Kennedy Assassination by Sherry P. Fiester. You need to get the book. All right, if if you look at the Kennedy assassination, if you say, yeah, he was killed, blah, 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 but I don't have any way to explain it to people when they question me and they say, well, what's the evidence? Because everybody nowadays, you have the CSI effect. Everybody's a friggin' forensics expert from watching CSI, right? So hit them with this. Hit them with the evidence from someone that obviously knows what she's talking about, okay? This isn't me. I'm, a radio show host, webmaster, researcher. This isn't a regular just book author and researcher. This isn't even as some people would use in the pejorative sense, an idiot in his basement with a pair of boxers and a tinfoil hat on his head. No. This is a certified crime scene investigator, somebody who the courts in this country, the federal courts, I may add, okay, we all know how bad the court system can be. They take her seriously. So we should too. I'm not kidding. This isn't, Popeye's plug-a-thon. You know how I am. I only plug and promote things that I truly believe in. Okay? And this is something I'm telling you. This book, her book, Enemy of the Truth, Myths, Forensics, and the Kennedy Assassination. Incredible book. If you want to sit down and go through the crime scene investigation version of the Kennedy assassination, read this. And I guarantee you'll start to look at things differently. So, Sherry, when we were going to the break, we were talking about the Dallas police. And you made a really good point. At the time, they didn't focus on forensics. So even though forensics were just starting to be more widely accepted, they kind of looked at it like, who really cares? And it's that same attitude they had. I know I was off air. We chatted for a while. I talked to you about, I've researched serial killers and stuff. And that's the same type of attitude the FBI had with Robert Ressler when they started with the whole profiling unit. And they wanted to start profiling killers and coming up with the term serial killer or spree killer or mass murder and coming up with these actual definitions. It was the same type of attitude they had where these law enforcement agencies were like, oh, that's all hooey-fooey baloney. You don't need that. And the Dallas police, I'm not trying to make any... I'm not trying to defend them in any way. The police department itself did have corruption in it, but looking at it from a professional viewpoint, like Sherry did, looking at it from a crime scene investigator's viewpoint, they dropped the ball. Hands down, they dropped the ball. But you also have to understand the mentality of the law enforcement at the time, too. All of this comes to play. I know that a lot of conspiratorial thinking doesn't want to sometimes, it's everybody's 100% evil. Well, no, you have the right people in the right places of power, and then the rest of the people, the people that control the people that are in the right places of power that control things, right? They know how things are done, so they just move and manipulate the investigation, as such. And I think that's a real important point to just throw out there and cover really quick. And before I had forgotten about it and we moved on, I wanted to throw that out there. What are your thoughts on that, Sherry?
I don't think that the Dallas Police Department or anyone in that department actually thought to themselves, I'm going to do something that's going to degrade evidence, or I'm going to do something to mishandle evidence, or anything similar to that. I really don't. I think that they were overwhelmed. I think that they had a lot of people looking at them, and they knew that this was something that was really major, and they made mistakes. I don't think that they did it on purpose, but I think they made mistakes. And it could have had something to do with confirmation bias. And confirmation bias is something that happens to everyone in different circumstances, but I will say with police, this is the way that it happens. You go to a crime scene and you see someone that's shot and the gun is there next to their hand, and you go to autopsy and you find out, based on all of the available information, that you're looking at a suicide. And then you have that same scenario repeated several times, and then one day you go to a crime scene and it looks the same, and so you make that assumption that this is a suicide, and you begin to work a crime scene with the answer and working backwards, try to find evidence that supports your conclusion, which is exactly what the Warren Commission did, if I can put that in there. but you have a particular bias towards what you're looking for. And that's one of the things that happens with police departments. And I think that it could be possibly something that happened here. I don't think that these were people of poor integrity. I don't think these are people that took their job lightly. I think that they wanted to do a good job, but they fell back on habits that were not necessarily good habits, and they failed to follow the written procedures for their department or for the national standards that were well known across law enforcement nationwide. So, I don't want to excuse their behavior because I think it's inexcusable. I mean, we are talking about the murder of the President of the United States. And this is something that needed an experienced crime scene investigator. And I just don't see how they could have let someone with, I think he had 2 months of experience left unsupervised to process the crime scene. But even when you had supervisors there, they missed evidence and they mishandled evidence. And these were people that should absolutely have known better.
And you see, that's the part where, to me, I think it was a mixture of both. I think that there was corruption probably at the higher levels, and what happened was you just had the right person in the right place. And they know, like you were just talking about, they understand how all of that works. And if you understand that, then you can probably it only takes one person or maybe two. That's all you need. Right. And it doesn't mean the whole police department is corrupt. It just means that someone probably higher up was, and it doesn't mean that they might have even known why. Somebody could have come to them and said, you need to do this, you need to do that, whatever. A lot of times when people investigate conspiracies, because they are real, when people have a tendency to investigate conspiracies involving the government, we'll say, sometimes the first, and I speak to this because I used to do this myself. Sometimes one of the first things you want to do is, but they all knew, it's all corrupt, every one of them, they're all in on it. And more often than not, that's not true. Yes, there are cases where there are heavily corrupt police departments, and I know Dallas had a lot of issues and stuff. I get it. But I think a lot of times that aspect gets blown out of proportion by the disinfo people on purpose, so that way when you look at it like you did, and you look at it with a fresh mind and you understand everything, you understand the forensics of it because of your law enforcement background, but you also are looking at it with an open mind and you understand how things were at the time, and there's many different factors you're taking into account is where I'm going with this.
Right.
And not many people do that. A lot of people, I think, because I'm not making fun of anybody. Again, I've done it myself. A lot of that is that innate distrust we have in us for the government, because they've lied to us so many times and about so many other aspects of this case. When you see a government agency getting involved, instantly you think everybody involved was bad. I do think there was corruption inside that. This is not Sherry, this is me from my research. I think there was corruption inside there, and there might have been people here or there that mishandled things or did stuff, but that was at higher levels. I think all the lower level people, just like in anything else, you end up becoming a useful idiot, and you end up being manipulated and you don't even realize it. And then you end up becoming the fall guy too, because you're the ones doing the investigation. So if the Dallas PD screws up, we don't really know what happened behind the scenes. Somebody else could have manipulated the situation and they become the fall guy. And then the real perpetrator of whoever, planted something or moved something or whatever the case may be, right, in the situation, they walk away while I'm not excusing the Dallas PD. I think it's a mixture of both. That's just my personal opinion. But, it is what it is. Again, when you read Sherry's book, it gives you this understanding. You need to have this better understanding. You can't just look at something one-sided. In order to better understand the complexities of the situation, because we all know that situations, no matter what they are always more complex than they seem on the outside, right? I mean, you can look at your own personal life and you can see that. Somebody on the outside might seem that they have a great personal life, but there's all this inside strife inside them and fighting with their wife or something behind the scenes. But on the outside, it's a different story. same thing. Sherry's book really makes you look at stuff not only in a forensic way, but it helps you look at it, and take other things into account. Again, the way that the police department's SOPs were, and I like how you put it in your book, you don't really choose a side. You're not defending them, and you're not attacking conspiracy theorists. Or defending conspiracy theorists and attacking the police. You're middle of the road, and you let the facts lead you where they may. And again, we could go for 2 hours just on the Dallas Police Department alone, but there's so many other things I want to cover while I've got Sherry on, and the hour is just flying. The first hour is already almost over, so she will be here for hour number 2, though, so don't fear. But there's a few other things that I want to pick your brain about, Sherry, because this was a massively large crime scene.
Before we move out of the Dallas Police Department, I want to bring up one other thing, if you don't mind.
No, go right ahead.
The most important evidence that came out of there were the shells. People have questions about the paper bag and the boxes. And, of course, the weapon. And there's not one piece of evidence that there's not a question about. There's not one piece of evidence that you can point to and they can say, this is on a sketch, this was photographed, it was properly packaged and processed, and the chain of custody is correct for it. Not one piece. That's almost stunning in it, just knowing that. Because you would think there would be at least one thing that they did correctly, that they handled correctly, that there's no question about it, but there isn't. And that is why I think people want to believe that they purposely messed up, because how can anybody be that bad? But it's one of those things, if something can go wrong, it will go wrong. And a lot of it had to do with the mindset of the people that were working there. You had one person who knew absolutely nothing in Studebaker, who is processing. He allows people, he decides he's going to fingerprint the boxes. They haven't been photographed, but he's in such a rush to do what he thinks he, needs to do something. And so he takes the boxes down and he starts fingerprinting, and then he realizes, I don't have them photographed. So he puts them back and he photographs them. But he doesn't tell anybody because he knows he's done the wrong thing. And instead, he lets his supervisor get on the stand before the Warren Commission. And then Lieutenant Carl Day is asked, why does the photograph from outside look different from the photographs from inside of the boxes that are in the window? And he's forced to admit that they must have been moved. Then you have the thing about people that are testifying saying that Captain Fritz picked up the spent shell casings inside the depository by the 6th floor window that supposedly Oswald shot from, and has them in his hand. And he lets someone else look at them and take a photograph of them. Then Studebaker comes in and he gives them to him, and there's testimony to that, but he doesn't know where they go. So he just throws them down and takes a picture. But then when people are ready to testify, they look at the photograph and they say, for instance, Mooney and Detective Johnson both look at that photograph and say, well, that's not what they look like. And that's when people start thinking, well, someone is changing things. They're doing this on purpose. There's a sinister motive behind it. When really the motive is Fritz, who is the captain, is used to doing whatever he wants. And he's not concerned about whether or not things have been photographed yet. And so he's just in that good old boy phase and doing what he wants to do. He's the big boss there, and he can pick up casings if he wants to. And then you have somebody on the other end of the spectrum who knows absolutely nothing and is trying so hard to do what he thinks he's supposed to do. And the only thing he can remember is that, oh, I'm supposed to fingerprint things, but I know I've messed up and I need to hide that. So it's not that there's this sinister conspiracy necessarily to confuse the evidence and the processing of the crime scene. But there's a lot of other things behind it. And all of this is in the testimony. And it's just a matter of understanding how crime scenes are processed and worked, and knowing the kind of mindset that police officers have. and how that works, that really gives us the insight into what happened in the Texas School Book Depository.
And we need to have that kind of understanding. That's what I was talking about you having that understanding as a crime scene investigator and with law enforcement background, being a trainer and teaching these type of things to other people. It's good to have that information and your look on things and your take on things, because, again, it's easy to look at it from obviously this was a conspiracy. So now we've already determined there's more than enough evidence to say that Oswald wasn't a lone gunman. Okay, so obviously there's a conspiracy. So we've taken that step. So now when you start to look at things, that can taint the way you look at things. You automatically you're going to look at everything with it was conspiratorial done that way. And again, I'm not saying that there weren't things done that I have a problem with the Dallas PD and the way some certain things were handled, or I think there was corruption here or there. But all you need is to have one person higher up that knows the exact traits of the people that you just talked about. Those two individuals by themselves are perfect examples, because they're higher up. If they know how those two people are, can manipulate the situation so that those people will act in a already predetermined way, because they know how they're going to react to a situation. So you just put the right, maybe instead of, I'm telling you, a lot of times it's not as, and I'm not saying that there wasn't conspiratorial stuff, anything going on. I'm just saying a lot of times that's where a lot of the misinformation comes from, because when you start to research it and you actually look into it like you did, you see that you read the testimony and stuff. And I'm not saying, they could have lied or whatever, but when you dig deep and you start to research this and you go through everything and you have that understanding also of how A, things worked back then, B, how things work now, and how crime scenes should be investigated. I don't have that background. So you can look at this with a set of eyes that I don't have and say, wait, this wasn't done. It is a conspiracy, ladies and gentlemen, but this, and this weren't done to be conspiratorial. This, and this were done because of X, Y, and Z. And it's important to point that stuff out, ladies and gentlemen, because the whole premise of the book, like Sherry puts in the book, is that there are myths and facts, and there are a lot of them surrounding the Kennedy assassination. And she is trying to separate the myths from the facts, because if we're going to get to the bottom of this and actually make any headway with this and do something like everybody says they want to do, right, and bring the perpetrators to justice, well, the only way we're going to be able to do that is to sort through the myths from the facts. And a lot of the myths end up being created over the course of time because of misunderstandings about how maybe police work is done, or how the SOPs were at the time, or how a particular individual. Remember, everything comes into account, ranging from the SOPs of the police department and their investigative research all the way to the subtle nuances of the investigator themselves. All of that comes into play. Now it's even to this day it's the same way it has to come into play. Today it's a little different though, because now there is more stuff, time, energy, effort focused on the forensics aspect of it. But it really is important to have that understanding, because that helps weed through a lot of the garbage. Because once you can separate the fact from the myths, right, that enables you to move on to the next subject, right, and then the next subject, and you do that with each one. You can kind of get the garbage away from the good stuff, and then get all of that evidence and put it together, and then look at all of the real evidence. And with a fresh mind, first you got to sort the real stuff out from the garbage, and then you can look at the real stuff collectively afterwards and try to piece it together and figure out how everything works together. But in order to do that, you have to separate fact from myth, and your book does a hell of a job doing it.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And again, without that forensic research aspect, angle of it, I asked you why, when we were talking off air, I said, why did you want to look, what made you a cold case investigator kind of look at it? You told me basically it was, you had heard so many times the JFK research community, because, you knew people, and they had said, if we only had the evidence, if we only had the evidence, if we only had the evidence. Well, now they have the forensic evidence, and it's from someone who is certified, and the courts believe. So it's not like if we actually took this to a court of law, and I'm not saying that's what Sherry's goal is, but if we took it to a court of law, per se, and we had a prosecutor or whoever, we figured something out, right? And they were able to read her book. They could literally use her book and bring her. They could bring her in as a witness, and she could be literally in court testifying about this. And they would have to take her seriously. They take her seriously about other stuff. And if you don't think that people in the past have tried to probably throw the JFK thing in her face, in her professional life, in a crime scene case or whatever, lawyers are sharks. I'm sure they have already. And I'm willing to bet if they have, it's gotten destroyed already. You see, that's how impeccable her credibility is. So can you imagine if we could get this case, and I'm just saying this, Sherry, but can you imagine if we could get this case and you to be able to testify in court, if we could figure out, like, who did what, you know what I mean? And we could, at least, even if we're not going to bring a physical person to justice, at least do the same thing they did with the Martin Luther King Jr. Investigation, where they brought it to a civil trial. And they were able to prove that there was units within the CIA, FBI, and Army Special Forces / Intel that conspired to take out Martin Luther King Jr. So can you imagine if we could just get Sherry and her information into a court of law like that, and even if it was just a civil trial, with her impeccable background. Ladies and gentlemen, she hasn't been refuted yet in her work. Okay, that's amazing. And this lady is telling you, she is telling you that there is enough evidence to at least point to the fact that there was a conspiracy. The forensics show it. I'm telling you, you need to check her book out. All right, hour number 1 is up. Hour number 2 coming up. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back in a few minutes. While we're at break, check out Sherry's book, Enemy of the Truth, Myths, Forensics, and the Kennedy Assassination. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be right back. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back with hour number 2 here on tonight's live edition of Down the Rabbit Hole. I am your host, Popeye, from federaljack.com. It is February 27th, 2013. Tonight, I have been talking about the JFK assassination. As I said in hour number 1, since last year, I've decided to devote at least one, if not more, show per month to the topic of the Kennedy assassination because it's the 50th anniversary. Now, I've done broadcasts on it before, but now I am definitely at least once a month, if not twice or more, focusing on the assassination because it's the 50th anniversary. And as it leads up and gets closer to November, I'm actually going to start to do more and more and more broadcasts. And Sherry's going to be back on with me. I'm going to have Vince Palmera back on. I already talked to Leno Sanik about it. I'm going to have him back on more. The entire year leading up to the 50th anniversary, I am going to hammer home the point that the assassination of the president was not by a lone nut job, and that it was a conspiracy. And I'm not going to tell you who did it or why they did it. I mean, I'm going to cover all that, but I'm not going to try to pound into your head an exact point of why they did this or did that. I'm just going to give you an overwhelming amount of evidence that shows that there's a conspiracy. I don't want you to trust me. I want you, well, I rephrase that. I don't want you to believe everything. I want you to trust me, but I want you to go check it out for yourself. Trust but verify, like Kennedy used to say. You must do the research yourself. I could sit here and beat you over the head with this for 2 hours, 3 hours, 4, 5, 6 hours. My guest, Sherry Fiester, could sit here and beat you over the head. All the other JFK researchers out there could beat you over the head. But unless you do the research yourself, unless you read, I don't mean just watching a YouTube video. Sherry and I were talking about this off air earlier. That is not researching. Yes, I release things via YouTube. I play audio from YouTube clips, and there are many good reference resources on YouTube. But that is not the only place you should be doing your research. You need to read. You need to do investigations, and that entails reading, whether it's reports, articles, books. It is what it is. And one of those super important books to get is my guest, Sherry Fiester's book, Enemy of the Truth, Myths, Forensics, and the Kennedy Assassination. And I'm going to keep plugging her book, ladies and gentlemen. And the reason I'm going to keep plugging her book is because this thing is an eye-opener. Now, I've been investigating the JFK assassination for, since I was about 14, 15. So for an epically long time, over 20 years now. And I can tell you that I have never seen a book like this where they took the forensic approach to it and dissected it. And Sherry, I know you probably get trolls and haters and stuff hating on you for some of the things that you've put in here. And I know even maybe some of those haters might even be people in the JFK research community, because as I said in hour one, people get emotional attachments to certain evidence. I know one of the things that you have tackled is pretty controversial in the community, at least from my standpoint and others, I guess. But as far as I'm concerned, basically, it's ironic, as I talked to you about this off air, I kind of had the same thoughts that something wasn't right about a certain thing dealing with the assassination, and that would be the grassy knoll. And when I talked to you off air about this, you confirmed what I had thought, and your book actually is what really, I mean, it just verified it. It hit it home. And that would be the grassy knoll. Now, a lot of people have issues with the fact that you have said that there was not a shot from the grassy knoll, and automatically people go, oh, look, I thought she said there was a conspiracy. Well, hold up, people, before you have a super emotional reaction, and don't let the lady finish and actually listen to what she's saying, okay? She's saying there was a shot from the front, which by definition destroys the official government story. So there was a conspiracy. There was obviously a second shooter. All she's saying is the evidence doesn't point to the fact that it was at the grassy knoll, but somewhere else. You know, that somewhere else was the triple underpass, the Stemmons Motor Freeway, the top of it up there, okay? So, Sherry, I know this is very contentious, we'll say, you know, amongst the research community. First, how have your peers and the people, you know, researching this, whatever, how have they responded to your shocking, but as I said, verifying my thoughts on this earlier, evidence that the shot didn't come from the grassy knoll? And ladies and gentlemen, to understand really quick, if you look at the, and I'm going to give Sherry the floor and let her take over, but to understand, if you look at the grassy knoll, and this is what I had said to her earlier. This was always my issue, my bone of contention. If you look at the grassy knoll where it is, if you look at the headshot in the Zapruder film, if you see how his head went back, and then if you look at the wounds and you look at the autopsy photos and stuff, Kennedy's head, it was the right side of his head where the bullet entered. Okay, well, if it came out the back, right, that would indicate it came from the front, like through the windshield area towards the triple underpass. And the thing I always had an issue with about the grassy knoll was if he shot from the grassy knoll, it would have been on more of an angle. It would have been more to his right. And if that was the case, it would have hit him in the forehead. Even if it hit him in the same spot, it would have been at a different angle. And the wound would have been extremely different. It wouldn't have been on the angle it was. It would have been more out the side of his head. And out the left side of his head. I mean, not that Jackie didn't have blood and stuff on her, and the driver and everybody around them didn't have, but there would have been more of it on that side than out the back half of the limo. And talking to Sherry and reading her book, it confirmed my thought on it. And I was like, oh, wow, just wow. And then I got a chance to pick your brain on it today. So, Sherry, you have the floor. First, how have your peers, taken your evidence, and then, just go from there?
For many years, I was a person that believed that the headshot originated from the grassy knoll. And I do believe that a shot came from the grassy knoll. But now I know that shot did not strike President Kennedy in the head. And I know that because of reconstructing the trajectory analysis for that particular headshot. The first time I did that, and I called my sister and said, hey, guess what? I just did trajectory analysis on the headshot, and the shooter is not at the grassy knoll. Her words were, you've lost your mind. You're absolutely crazy. Because for 30 years, people have looked at this. They know that the shooter was there. They have witnesses that observed smoke, that heard shots originating from behind the fence. All these people rushed up the the slope to the fence. There was even one witness that said they saw a flash of light. The police officers believe the shot originated from that area. So how can you possibly believe that the shooter for the headshot was anywhere but the grassy knoll? Well, I worked this case as a murder. I reconstructed the crime scene. And one of the steps within that reconstruction is to do trajectory analysis. This is something that is done on crime scenes, in shooting cases, all over the country and all over the world in the same way. So it's not a matter of what procedure do you like to use and how do you interpret the information that you get. But by looking at the standards for trajectory analysis, you follow the steps one by one, you come to a conclusion. It's mathematically based, and so it's very difficult to be for the information to be misconstrued. So I did the trajectory analysis, and I determined that you cannot do a single line trajectory, which means from a particular entry point to a particular exit point, because we don't have that. But what we do have is, I think, a consensus of people that believe, if you believe in a front shot at all, that the right front quadrant of the head is the area of entry, and the right rear quadrant of the head is the area of exit. And if you use those areas instead of little points of entry and exit, then you can develop what is called a trajectory cone. And so I did that. And if you extend the trajectory cone out in front of President Kennedy, then it says the shooter is going to be somewhere within that trajectory cone and in a right to left and in an elevated position. And in doing that, the trajectory cone doesn't include any portion of the north side of Dealey Plaza. That means it has no portion of the grassy knoll, no portion of the area behind the fence, no portion of that area of the triple overpass that is adjacent to the grassy knoll. The shooter had to be on the opposite side, on the south side of Dealey Plaza. And it has to do with one question: where is front? Because if you don't know where front is, then you can't determine where the shooter was located. If you have been saying for many years the shooter was in front of the president, by determining where front is, it helps you to determine where the shooter is. For many years, I was one of those people that assumed wrongly that front was the grassy knoll, but it isn't.
And have you gotten like any type of vitriolic reaction to this? I'm sure there are people that are emotionally connected to the grassy knoll theory. And by the way, she's not saying there wasn't a shooter on the grassy knoll. All she's saying is the fatal headshot that you see in the famous Zapruder film and the headshot that blew his brains out did not come from the grassy knoll. That's what she's saying. And actually, if you think about it, what Sherry is saying backs up the idea of a triangulation of fire. That means that there was a guy shooting from the Daltex building, there was a guy shooting from the Stimmons Motor Freeway, and there would have been somebody shooting from the grassy knoll area. That's a triangulation of fire. That's 3 points of fire on Kennedy's position. So, and you could get into, well, where did the guy's round from the grassy knoll go? Who did it hit? Where did it go? Blah, blah, blah. But what she's not saying there wasn't somebody there. What she's saying is there was the headshot that killed him did not come from there. And if that's what the forensics and the evidence show, then, again, we cannot allow our emotions to lead us. We have to allow the evidence to lead us. So have you gotten negative responses, positive responses? How have been the responses? Let me frame it that way.
The first time that I presented this information to a public group was at a November in Dallas conference that was hosted by JFK Lancer in Dallas. And I think it was in 2003. So I've been saying this for a while. They looked at me when I finished giving this presentation, and I took them from step one right down the line, everything that has to be done, and explained it. And when I finished, there was a microphone to the side of the room, and I said, "Are there any questions?" And I mean, literally, people were just looking at me with their mouths open. No one was moving, and no one was saying anything. They were absolutely stunned that I would say that to them. And I have to tell you, it's great when you're saying what people want you to say. That's like preaching to the choir, and it's like, "Amen, sister, we're with you." But when I did that, they objected. They did not want to accept it right away. Now, some people did. They said, "Okay, yes, I understand this, and I'm with you. I accept it." But then there were other people that said, "No, I don't think you understand. There, you have had to have made a mistake somewhere, because everybody knows that the shooter for the headshot is behind the grassy knoll." Well, here's the deal. We all use our life experiences to help us to determine what truth is and what reality is in our life. We use the information that we have at the time to make the best decisions that we can and to reach conclusions that we believe are true. But if someone comes to you with new information that is verifiable, that is scientific in nature, the kind of evidence that flies in the face of what you believe, you have two choices. You either refute it, or you integrate that new information with what you know, and you reconcile that by either saying, "It's not true, I can prove that it's not true," or you're going to say, "This is truthful because scientifically, the scientific basis for it is credible." And so that's what people have had to do at different times. They get the information, and they have to reconcile it within themselves. Am I going to believe this? Well, you can either believe in math or you cannot believe in math. It doesn't really matter, because the truth is the truth, whether people believe it or not. And I know that there's people that are heavily vested in this, and they just don't want to say or believe that for almost 50 years they've been wrong. That's hard to do. It takes a big person to say, "For 50 years I was wrong. And I talked about it, and I wrote about it, and I defended it, but I was wrong." And so, that's kind of what has happened. And some people are very accepting right away, and they say, "I appreciate, the work that you've done, and this is going to make a difference in assassination research community and for the history of our nation, to have a more accurate narrative, and for people to understand what happened in Dealey Plaza." And then there are other people that are going to say, "It's just a bunch of bunk. I don't even need to read the book to know that it's just a bunch of bunk." And that's the kind of results that I get.
And that's an emotional reaction. That's exactly what that is. That's an emotional reaction to something that they don't want to admit. Because I think a lot of times, if they say, "Well, I was wrong," and yes, it's the admitting that they might have been wrong about it. But I think they're afraid that if they say that they were wrong, then that automatically makes their argument against the government's official story invalid, and then that makes the government's argument right. But what they're not paying attention to is, no, what she's saying is there were two shooters, two, dose, double, two. That means, guess what? The official story that one person shot him goes out the window too. So it's not that you believe the official government story, and I think it's also part of, admitting that, somebody has to admit that they're wrong, and though everything that they've believed for that long is wrong. It's like an onion. There's a couple different levels to it, and at the end of the day, it's an emotional reaction that they have to the evidence, and you can't get emotionally attached to it. For the longest time, I thought that, I've always said, well, the second gunman on the grassy knoll, the gunman on the grassy knoll. I've repeated it, over and over and over again. Now, yes, Lee Bowers saw two guys there. Is there evidence to support the fact that there was a gunman there? Yes, but the evidence does not support the fact that his shot is what hit Kennedy in the head, which means there was another shooter. So by any means, that shouldn't piss off the conspiracy research crowd. That verifies that there was another shooter. And it's something that was done forensically. So if it ever does go to a court of law, or if you at least wanted to try to win the court of public opinion, you could say, look, this woman is a forensic investigator. She treated this as a cold case murder. That's how you treated the JFK assassination. And that's exactly what she did, ladies and gentlemen. When I spoke to Sherry about this, she looked at this like it was a cold case murder, and she went and reopened it and, did everything from square one. And guess what? The evidence proves that there was two gunmen. So some of the forensic evidence refutes a little bit of what we might have believed over the course of time, but it still verifies that there was more than one shooter. And that emotional attachment, that's a bad thing, because it happens in all these research communities, I've noticed, Sherry. Whether it's JFK, 9/11, anything, you'll get that visceral emotional reaction. But
I do have to say, there are a lot of people that are in the research community who have immediately embraced this, and I'm talking about authors like Sarah Weck, Larry Hancock, Lamar Waldron, Stu Wexler, Barry Ernest, Barry Kirsch, Phil Drago. I mean, I could go on and on. There are people who understand this, and they accept it, and they have come to me and said, this is a great job, and we appreciate it because, we were talking earlier, and we were talking about people being conspiracy theorists or historical researchers. And I said, I don't like the term conspiracy theorist, because today conspiracy theorists have come to symbolize something ridiculous or, crazy behavior, emotional statements that don't have any real factual context. And it makes it easy for people to dismiss what is being said, because they can put that label on them. Well, they're a conspiracy theorist, so we don't have to listen to it. And then there are people who, and I definitely don't associate myself as a conspiracy theorist. Then there are people that are historical researchers. These are people that they look at the facts that are already there. They collect information, they organize it, they analyze it, they interpret it, and they provide answers. These researchers, these historical researchers, look at evidence that's been peer-reviewed, research that has been done by other people with scientific knowledge. They're respectable sources. And I think that that's where the majority of people are that are looking at this particular homicide.
I agree. I'm going to cut us off, Sherry, because we got the break sneaking up on us, but I wanted to let you get that in there as much as possible. That was very well said. Ladies and gentlemen, do not go anywhere. We'll be right back. Last half hour coming up. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. Final segment of tonight's broadcast. I realized, and I didn't even realize I was doing it until I caught myself doing it, but I was trying to put too much into just 2 hours tonight, even though I already knew I wasn't going to be able to fit it all into 2 hours. And what I mean is picking Sherry's brain. Now, we're going to stay on the topic that we've been on, because this is something that's really important to stay on. The fact that the forensic evidence shows that the shot to the head came from the front by the triple underpass, and we're going to stay on that. So Sherry has graciously agreed to come back on the broadcast sometime in the next 2 weeks, and we're going to get into some of the other evidence in her book. And if we have to have her on a third time to keep going over it, or a fourth time, and a fifth time. And again, she's going to come back on in the future over the course of time leading up to the 50th anniversary of the Kennedy assassination. But first of all, Sherry, thank you so much for being willing to come on for, doing another show with me, because I know there's just too much evidence. Amazing book, ladies and gentlemen. Enemy of the Truth, Myths, Forensics, and the Kennedy Assassination. Now, that aside, and before we get into the evidence, where can the people purchase the book? So that way, maybe in 2 weeks, they can kind of thumb through it and be maybe a little bit ahead of some of the other listeners for the next broadcast.
You can get a signed copy from jfklancer.com or sherryfiester.com. But it's also available through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all of the other major bookstores over the internet.
Awesome. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to do a bit of an interactive thing here in the last 20 minutes or so here. And this was not my idea. You can actually thank Sherry for this idea. She came up with this during the break because we were trying to figure out how we were going to get all the evidence and be able to, fit it in like 20 minutes. And she came up with a really ingenious way to do it. So I want everybody, if you're on a computer right now, if you're listening to the broadcast later on, you can do this too, in the archive or whatever. As long as you're not driving, don't attempt it. But if you're near a computer, go to Google, whatever search engine you use, I don't care, and bring up a picture of Dealey Plaza, but it's got to be an aerial photograph looking down on the plaza, so you can see the book depository and the triple underpass and Elm Street and everything, because you got to be able to see it so she can walk you through it. Now I'm going to give everybody about 10, 15 seconds to do that while I chat here. Go to your favorite search engine, whatever, bring up an aerial photograph of Dealey Plaza so you can get an idea of what is where. There are ones out there that will show you where the book depository is, so you can kind of get an idea as to which way the motorcade was traveling. There's plenty of them out there. They have arrows showing you everything. Find it really quick while I'm chatting right now. Bring it up on your computer. In about 10 more seconds, I'm going to have Sherry go and do her magic, because I'm telling you, this lady is, you cannot refute her work. You can't. Sorry, you can't. That's why she's here. That's why I'm promoting her book the way I am. She didn't pay me to promote her book. She didn't say, Popeye, please promote my book. Please, please, please. No. She sent me a copy of her book and said, I know you do JFK research. You might be interested in my book. Check it out. And I read her book, and then I emailed her back and said, you need to come on my broadcast. Wow. Okay, so get her book. Muy importante. The crime scene itself, the freeway, the triple underpass, the grassy knoll, all of these things have been brought up in the first half hour. And Sherry brought out this information that said that the shot didn't come from there. And I agree that after seeing her stuff, it, like I said, it verified what I already thought. So with that in mind, and now that I've given you all enough time to have the picture, Sherry, the floor is yours. Please walk everyone through how you came to the conclusion via the evidence and the forensic evidence, I should say. Please walk everybody through how you came to the conclusion of where the shot came from, because this is really important, ladies and gentlemen. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, trajectory analysis helps us to determine where possible shooter locations for the headshot are located. And so in order to do that, there are 4 steps that have to be completed. The first step is to determine where the wound locations are. Now, we have wounds that have been identified in autopsy, changed and identified by the Warren Commission, the Clark Panel, the House Select Committee, and a lot of other people that have looked at it as individuals. And the wound itself, an entry wound and an exit wound, is not a little point that anyone can agree on. So I think the easiest thing for us to do is to be the most generous and say that we believe that all of the evidence, which is true, all of the evidence does say that the damage to President Kennedy's head is restricted to the right side of his head. Now, if you believe in a rear shot or a front shot, trajectory analysis works the same way. If you believe in a front shot, then we are going to use the right front quadrant as the entry and the right rear quadrant as the exit. So if you have a little piece of paper handy, draw an oval, which would be like a bird's eye view of a head, put a little nose on it so you'll be able to determine which way the head is looking. Draw a cross that would divide the head into 4 sections. And if you do that, then it's going to allow you to do trajectory analysis. So step 1 is to determine where the wounds are. Step 2 is to determine which direction the projectile is traveling. Now, at autopsy, they looked at 2 things. 1, they had Oswald that they had arrested. They believed that he was in the 6th floor window at the Texas School Book Depository, and they had a weapon there, and they had the casings that were found on the floor near the window, and so they said the shots came from the rear. End of discussion. However, there's other ways that you can make a determination about the direction of travel for a projectile. One is beveling. Historically, beveling determines the trajectory directionality in bone. They had some bone with beveling, but it was just a piece of a bone. It wasn't a hole in the skull. It was just a little area that had a little beveling. What we have found out, however, is that beveling is not the best standard for making that determination, and that it should not be used because it's easily confused with entry and exit, and it also depends upon where the bone is and how thick it is, and there's a lot of things. It's extensively covered within Enemy of the Truth. Another way of telling is fracture sequencing, and this is the little lines that are made in the skull when a bullet strikes the skull, and the way those lines are created indicates to a forensic pathologist the direction of force, the direction that the force is traveling, and in this case it would be the direction that the bullet was traveling. The fracture sequencing combined with the movement of President Kennedy's head, and I'm talking about both the forward and the rear movement, combined also with the bullet fragment distribution that we see in the x-rays, and the blood spatter that is observed in the Zapruder film and from testimony and evidence outside the Zapruder film, all point to a forward shot. So if you want to believe those 5 things that are scientifically proven as a front shot, then you would want to say the right front quadrant is the entry and the right rear is the exit. If you do not believe that, if you believe that the shooter for the headshot came from behind President Kennedy, you would just reverse that. Now, the next step would be to determine President Kennedy's location within Dealey Plaza. This was determined by Thomas Canning, who was an engineer with NASA. The House Select Committee asked him to come in and with photogrammic analysis and a geological survey, they placed President Kennedy within Dealey Plaza at the time of the shooting. So if you have your little map and you had a little oval that would be your head, you could actually place the direction that he was looking within Dealey Plaza. And the way that you would do that is the same way that Thomas Canning did it. Thomas Canning determined that he was at a position that was about 90 degrees to Zapruder as Zapruder was filming, but that he was turned in profile about 26 degrees beyond that. So if you took your little head and you put it on that map at a 90-degree angle to where Zapruder was, and then you turned it an additional 26 degrees, that center line that goes down the top of your skull, if you extended it out within Dealey Plaza, you would be pointing to the area that's considered front for President Kennedy. Now, if you had all of that done, the next step would be to extend the trajectory cone out into the plaza in the direction that the bullet came from. But we don't have a point. We don't have a single point. So let's assume that one shooter was directly in front and that a bullet entered just to the right of the midline of the skull and exited right behind the ear, so that you have an extreme to the left entry and an extreme to the right exit. And then you reverse that. So someone standing, as President Kennedy would be looking, to his right would come in to the temple before the ear, but exit the back of the head before crossing that midline. What you've done is created an angle. If you extend that angle out into Dealey Plaza, then you have determined where the shooter for the headshot had to be standing. And that is how trajectory analysis is done. Then the only thing you have to determine is elevation, because you not only have to have a right to left trajectory, but you also have to have an elevation that's going to work. You should have the president looking just beyond the angled south end of the triple overpass, slightly into the parking lot that was adjacent to it and still is at that time. And the trajectory cone that you would create is going to be about 35 degrees. Only the very south end of the triple overpass and the majority of that parking lot is included within the trajectory cone. The north side of Dealey Plaza, which contained the area that Zapruder was in and the grassy knoll that we know of, and the place where the people were standing on top of the triple overpass, is all excluded mathematically as being a point of origin for the headshot.
Just amazing. Just amazing. I haven't seen this in history books. I haven't seen this on the news. Sherry, when was your book printed? Hold on. Let me double check. Why isn't this in the news, ladies and gentlemen? Why isn't this on ABC, NBC, PBS, CBS, CNN, Fox, MSNBC? Why? I'll tell you why. Because this would refute the government's official story, which he just told you is there was a shot from the freeway, and there's forensic evidence to prove it. Her book showcases that.
Now, not the freeway, but the overpass.
Well, yeah, that's what I meant, the triple overpass.
Right, the triple overpass, not the freeway.
Yeah, above the Stemmons Freeway, yes.
Right, and it could have come from the parking lot, too. I mean, that is not excluded. And the interesting thing about this is that the elevation for that area is sufficient to get over the highest point of the limousine. And Jackie is not an intermediate target. She would not be obscuring a shot from that location. And the person that could be there would be easily concealed. Everybody's looking on the other side. And they would just have to get in their car and drive away.
You know, you made a really good point, too. Even if they weren't, you know, because some people could say, well, how could they be concealed up on top of the overpass there? There's no way. Well, what happens if they were in a car? What happens if they were in a car that was parked right on the side, or a van or whatever, and they shot from inside the car? And you made a really good point to me off air, how the sound, the report of the gunfire will sound completely different if they were standing up on top of the freeway, you know, on the overpass there above the freeway, shooting down at Kennedy, or if they were in a van or a vehicle, well, whatever, car, with maybe a suppressor or something on a rifle, and they were aimed out over top right at Kennedy, it would sound completely different, and it might even throw the ear witnesses off with where they thought they heard the shot coming from. I mean, that's really important. If it came from up top there, they could have been in a car. This whole thing was pulled off with military precision. So to think that the shooters hadn't trained previously for a moving target, knowing they'd be shooting at a moving target, is absurd. So these guys, obviously, they could have pulled this off. It's why I point out the fact that they could have been in a car. They could have, you brought that up to me when we were chatting earlier, and that's important. I mean, the possibilities up there of how they could have camouflaged themselves. They could have been in a police uniform. I mean, is anybody going to question a cop standing up on top of the overpass with a rifle in his hand? No, they would think he's there to protect the president, right?
Right. You know what's interesting, too, is that this was thought of long before I thought of it. Do you know that it is a part of the official record that the triple overpass was a consideration in determining trajectory in the Warren Commission meeting notes on April 14th, 1964, and they directed that trajectory be examined when the reconstruction was done, and yet we don't have any records at all saying that was followed.
That doesn't surprise me because
there's really a lot of stuff in the book. Enemy of the Truth is the very best that I could do to present information in a non-biased way that allows people to take that information and make educated decisions about what happened. And I think that without it, we have a distorted viewpoint.
Well, again, that's why, like, I brought this up hour one. I like the way, because you right in the beginning of the book, you explain the whole reasoning pretty much. And you explain in there that, look, if you're going to do this investigation of the murder of a president, any type of justice, you have to weed out the wheat from the chaff, as they say, right? So you have to be able to get out the good from the bad. And once you can weed out all the misinfo from the real info and the facts and the evidence, then you can sweep all that stuff together, the good stuff, and now look at it with a fresh set of eyes. But first you have to weed through all the garbage, and your book helps someone do that. And it doesn't cover, again, not the political stuff, the behind the scenes, the conspiratorial, the who, the what, the where. She's covering the crime scene. The one thing that seems to never get talked about, almost. It's almost like what crime scene? Crime scene? Well, I don't see a crime scene. They've got the hands over the eyes, the hands over the ears, the hands over the mouth. There is no. I have not seen anybody do a comprehensive breakdown of the crime scene itself like you have, Sherry, and that is why I really appreciate the work and the time and the effort that you put into this book, and that's why I plug it and promote it the way I do. Because, ladies and gentlemen, this is a tool. Now we can kind of start to sort through just the stuff that she went over in the book. Now, there's other things. She focused on the crime scene, but if you take her approach and you start to maybe look at every other aspect of the conspiracy, right, through her set of glasses, maybe through try to take as much of a forensic approach as you can to it. See how that applies to some of the knowledge that you have and some of the info that you have about the Kennedy assassination, maybe some of the misconceptions or ideas that over the years you've become emotionally attached to. Try to put it to, I say let's take her viewpoint, her look at it, and let's try to apply it to other aspects. I'm not saying the whole thing needs to get changed, but you never know. We might find something else that we might have overlooked. You never know. We might be able to use, her methodology and sort through the garbage in other aspects of it, in the who, what, where, when, the political aspect of it, the conspiracy behind the scenes, the machinations, the secret government, the who, the big oil, all of that. I think if we used Sherry's idea of how she looked at it like a crime scene, I think maybe if we tried to, if you read her book, you'll have the understanding, and then maybe once you see things through her eyes, maybe we can apply that to the other stuff. But again, you have to read her book first in order to understand where she's coming from. Sherry, we got about a minute. I want you to plug everything again. Any websites, emails, anything. Go ahead.
Okay. You can purchase the book at jfklancer.com or on my webpage, which is sherryfiester.com. And if you are a person that likes to read blogs, I have a blog called Enemy of the Truth at WordPress.com. And I would enjoy hearing any feedback from anyone.
Just amazing information in this book. I'm really, look, ladies and gentlemen, you know how I am about books, and you know how I am about, I don't plug things I don't believe in. I've said this 100 times tonight. The reason I was so glad to get her on tonight and get some of this info out is, again, why has this not been on ABC News? The information she's providing in this book refutes everything. And again, her credentials, ladies and gentlemen, are impeccable. They can't try to character assassinate her. Won't work. I mean, I'm sure they would try, but it won't work. Her credentials speak for themselves. Sherry, it has been a pleasure and an honor to have you on the broadcast tonight. And you know what? Again, I'm just going to have you back on within the next few weeks. So, ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned for that. And again, purchase her book, Enemy of the Truth, Myths, Forensics, and the Kennedy Assassination. With that, we are out of time, and we are out of here. I love you all. Have no fear. Become autodidacts and educate yourselves. And stay tuned. My good friend Ryan Brooks is coming up. I'm out of here.